Good evening, and welcome to the Upper Darby Township Planning Commission meeting for February 13th, 2023. I'm going to call us to order now. It's about 7:05. Visual roll call. It appears we are all here, so we have quorum. You should all have a copy of the minutes from last month's meeting. Does anybody have any additions, changes, deletions, corrections for last month's minutes?
Do not.
Motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, communication and bills, we still have none, so we can speed right on through that. We do not have any saldo reviews for this evening, so we can go straight to our first item, which is under the zoning category, and we have some members of the Historic Commission, Upper Darby's Historic Planning Group, here to talk about the ordinance that they are proposing for adoption that would allow us to have an opportunity to hear about it, to ask some questions about it, to give our opinion on it as it then moves forward to council's approval, and how it would all then become part of zoning and planning operation of the township. So with that, I believe, Steve, you have a presentation ready?
There we go. This is what we presented to the Township Council. We can go to the next page. We actually have a little elevator pitch. The Upper Darby Historical Commission is a group of volunteer citizens working with local government property owners to preserve and celebrate historic places. So I think it's notable that this says volunteer group, because in the past, several other years, they had a paid staff that prepared a lot of the materials that we inherited. And without that, we wouldn't be in this place. We can go on. Next one, please. So this you can read yourself, but the advantages to the community can be increased property values. In most places where they have historic buildings and preservation goes on, it really improves the community. I have a particular interest in the 69th Street area, and that's how I got started on this. So we go to the next one. And we can skip to the next one. So there are two elements. There's an ordinance and there's a survey. The two are yoked together. The survey is an ongoing thing. So a survey is just a list of the properties. There are 200 some properties. And you really have to keep it up. You have to visit those properties every couple of years, take photographs, see how they're doing. The ordinance, of course, is the teeth that we don't have. That will make, say somebody buys a building, they want to tear it down and put a parking lot in there. That comes before, or when they apply to do that work, they'll look at the survey and there'll be a pause on that work while a kind of a trial ostensibly happens in front of the Township Council, where the Historical Commission will state their case and maybe bring out outside experts if we can, and the property owner will make his case, and then a ruling is done from that. We can go on. Next slides. There is a criteria that's written out so that people might say, hey, why is my property on this list? It has to meet several of these criteria to be on the list. So next slide, please. This is a map of all the historic properties in Upper Darby. And it's something that Kate Clifford put together for us. I didn't create this, but it's really nice because you can kind of, it's a visual of where they are, and you can mouse over each one and see what the property is, and it's got the correct number on it that corresponds to our survey. Next one, please. Now, here's an example of the actual materials. This is particular, this was the Lukens Levi's house. There is a historical write-up, photographs of the property, and we can go to the next one, please. And a map, and this follows National Park Service sort of format for these. We can go to the next one, please. Now, this is a house that's, this photograph on the lower right was about 4 years ago. The house was for sale, and it was purchased, next one, please. Next slide. So this is what it looked like 4 years ago. Next slide, please. Somebody purchased it and basically kind of gutted it. Next slide. And they're putting a third story on it. This is on State Road. You've probably seen it. So we had no way, no method of talking to these people and trying to get their architect to kind of keep the historical qualities. For instance, the dormers. They put the roof on it. The dormers aren't there. I have no idea what they're going to do with the stonework. I hope they'll point it and not stucco over it. So this is the kind of case study, I guess. Next slide, please. And this, we'll just leave this up, and that'll be the last one. You can kind of see what the process is proposed to be. Any questions?
I have just questions to understand I guess what I'd call kind of the transition, since we don't have the list. Well, we have the list, right? So you have 200 properties.
We have a list, yeah.
And so those properties, I guess what I'm trying to understand is the transition in the owner's mind to becoming a historical property owner. Like if I were to go buy a property, I would know, oh, this property's on the list.
Right.
And so therefore, if I were to get involved with this property, I should be aware that
Yeah, but currently,
I'm going to be held to a different standard. What's the grandfather approach for people who got put on the list but didn't know, you know what I mean, didn't know?
yeah, I don't know. I don't have any answer for that. I assume that we'll have to inform people, or there'll be a public announcement. I guess Scott, yeah.
I could speak to that.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Scott Alberts, Director of Administrative Services for the Township. I serve as the administrative liaison to the Historical Commission who developed this ordinance. One of the things that we have to do is advertise this, the ordinance and the survey to the public in anticipation of the Township Council adoption of it. So there will be public hearings, like we have with any ordinance. One thing that we've been advised to do is to also individually notify, property owners. So that's going to be when we get the various comments back and before we get to the Township Council meeting. One of the goals here is to contact them, let them know that they'll have an opportunity to be heard in that hearing.
I'm sorry, say it again, that they what?
That they'll have an opportunity to be heard at, in the public hearing. Yeah. But yeah, they are going to, we've been advised to provide them with direct notice as well as the public notice.
And I think you had said that the survey obviously has to be kept current, and so more properties could go on. So once the ordinance is established and we continue to do the survey, will there then be a continuing notification process? Let's just say it's me, like somebody unearths a fact like, oh, wow, I have a cool house that something interesting happened in. And but I didn't know that.
Right.
So will there, I assume, an ongoing process to then notify me, hey, we want to put you on this list?
Yeah, and so there'll be a couple stages where that could happen. So the Historical Commission going forward will recommend properties for inclusion on future updates to the survey. So it's a sort of rolling process that, as properties sort of develop historical significance, I mean, 200 years ago, when they built some of these buildings, they didn't think they'd be historically significant 5 years later, right? But over time, they developed historical significance. So one day, someone will say, this is a rare example of 1970s wood paneling rec room basement, right? I mean, whatever it is that we, in the future, decide is historically significant. The Historical Commission is the body that would make recommendations to Township Council. But before it can be formally, there's two things going on. There's the survey, which is a collaborative project with the Delaware County Planning Commission, Upper Darby Township's Historical Commission, and then there's the historical resource list as codified in the ordinance specifically for this purpose, which right now is a one-to-one overlap, right? I mean, it's, as we go forward, we're going to have to consciously add properties to the list, and that gets done by an active Township Council. So once again, public notice, good best practices to notify property owners and then hold the public hearing. As we add, and maybe next year we'll add 5 properties or we'll add 1 property from time to time as things come to the Historical Commission's attention.
And then, so there was the list, and then the ordinance also talked about a historic overlay district?
So the overlay, the list is just a list,
The
but
list, right.
as a point of, this is where you get into, it would be great to have the solicitor explain how ordinances work and zoning works, but the way it gets administered is by means of a zoning overlay. And so the zoning overlay often will consist of different kinds of properties in different areas. In this case, it consists of the properties on this list. Is that a fair representation of how zoning overlay works, Josh?
Yeah, it absolutely can be, especially for historic districts.
Right.
But wouldn't that mean every time you update the list, then you would have to amend the ordinance pursuant to the overlay? Or based on what you just, are you saying that when you're added to the ordinance, or excuse me, the overlay, the historic overlay will list out the properties that fall within that overlay?
Yeah, the resource list is the master list that informs the ordinance and the overlay. As we make changes, whatever changes have to be made to whether it be done before this commission, the Delaware County Planning Commission, the Township Council, each time we add things, it's a sort of replicating the initial process. So we make sure that everyone has the input, everyone has fair hearing. That process gets informed by our solicitor.
I don't think it would be quite the same as like a map change amendment, which would have to go to the county, have to go through us and then get approved by council. I think it would be more like the riparian buffer overlay that we have in our zoning code, where anywhere there's a creek 25 to 50 feet out is in the riparian buffer overlay. If that creek, moves south 15 feet, then that zoning district moves south 15 feet. Because it's an overlay, I think there's a little bit more flexibility.
And so just so I'm clear, the historic resources list that's referenced in the ordinance language is one and the same as the survey that we're referencing in the presentation? That's the same?
I think technically the survey also includes properties that are no longer extant. So for example, there's 2 properties many people in Upper Darby may be familiar with from the old Tuscarora tract that the township acquired in the mid-70s. There's one property still standing called Addingham Manor. It's also referred to as the Burnley Mansion. There were formerly 2 properties the township owned, the Valley House and the Hill House, so-called because one was up on the hill, one was on the valley. They were related to this mill complex. Both have since, one basically washed away in a storm and had to be, the rest of it had to be demolished. The other one was sort of demolition by neglect over a period of time between when they purchased it and when they really got their hands on managing it. And so those properties, we maintain the record and we maintain, this property once existed, it was historically significant, it appeared on our survey, and it will always remain on the survey. But we don't put that on the list because there's no, functionally speaking, there's nothing to demolish or alter. It doesn't exist anymore.
So a question about how the land development process would work. If you use the example you put up of that building on State Road, and the alterations are cringeworthy, I don't disagree at all. But but I'm looking at it, that building was vacant and dilapidated for many years, correct?
Actually, when it was sold, it was still habitable.
It was still habitable, okay.
You might be able to still find the same reference. I just did a search for the property and I found the interior shots. Wasn't in great shape, but it was habitable.
So just explain how, all right, so it was sold, explain what the process would be if it were on this list.
So we wouldn't find out about it until they, actually file something
Okay.
with the township, correct?
A land development,
Yeah, and then. the-
permit, right, yes, permits, okay,
Right.
okay.
And so when that happens, it gets flagged, we get notified, and then we work with, the owner to see the plans. We ask to see the plans, basically. I attended a seminar. Now, I've never done this process, right?
All right.
But I attended a seminar with a number of people who do it, and there are nonprofit, small nonprofit organizations. There's one in Pennsylvania that will help you with this process. So they will come and help you make the case. We also have people more knowledgeable than me in the community that can also do that kind of thing. But then the way I understand it is they ask the person to show renderings
Okay.
so they can get an idea of what it's going to look like. And then there's a negotiation.
So there's a negotiation, meaning you're going to try to get the architect to
To,
work with you, I guess.
yeah, to,
Okay. And,
to respect the.
yeah,
Yeah,
and they might.
right.
What if they don't? What happens then?
Well,
What's-
if they
what's the-
don't,
what
then
powers-
there's this adjudication that happens where we come from the commission and maybe our outside experts, we make our case for preservation.
Mm-hmm.
The owner can say, I can't afford to do that, or whatever. He makes his case, and then the township council decides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it would end up, okay.
Yeah. Now, in some cases, in some communities, they actually have a historical commission
Mm.
that has the power to do that.
Okay.
But we decided not to go that
Gotcha.
direction.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Who's going to maintain the list going forward? Because the township did it at one point, now you're doing it. Who's going to ultimately be held accountable to make sure the list is complete and updated?
Whoever the mayor appoints to the commission. Is that what you're asking?
Is the commission going to, like you said, at one point, Kate, somebody maintained the
Oh.
list?
Well, there was, Kate Clifford has, her purview is all of Delaware County. So she sort of knows what's going on in every community.
Okay, but this
But-
particular case, who's going to be maintaining the list for accuracy?
The people on the historical commission,
Okay.
yeah,
Are you doing it now?
yeah.
Okay.
So we're asking people, and we're all volunteers, so I've got to say there hasn't been that much activity, but we're asking people to go out, look at the properties. For instance, there was a property there that I couldn't find in Google Maps. So I went to the location, and I just trespassed on the property, and I found this amazing building back there that's in really bad shape. It was the mill manager's building, house. And we found the resident on another visit, and he was telling me that he can't afford to upkeep the house because his taxes are so high. So, I mean, that's a great case, and maybe we can work with this person, help him preserve this, or maybe we can convince him to donate the building to the township and no taxes, and he can stay there till, these are just my ideas. I mean, I haven't run this.
Where is this property?
It's hard to describe where it is. It's, but I can get you the information. Do you know?
Yeah,
what the
so-
addresses? It's,
Was it the one we visited
Yeah,
together? So it's right near the border of Clifton Heights, past the park with the we just did the new trail.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on the name right now, but I can certainly get you the information. What I think Steve is describing though, there's a couple things going on. There's the there's the historical resource survey, which is the collaborative thing that we sort of worked on with Kate Clifford in the county, and then this official list, which the Historical Commission continues to update, maintain. But the sort of expert, eyes on it happens in our Department of License and Inspection, Zoning and Planning. They'll have the master list, and one of the things that they can help us do is in these situations, as if you've ever researched properties, you probably figured out that parcel numbers, addresses, and physical locations of buildings often don't line up. Case in point, one of our township properties has an address of 384 Bloomfield Avenue because the post office says that that's where people should address mail, but it is nowhere near if you went to where Google Maps would take you, 384 Bloomfield Avenue, it would take you about half a block and way away from the paper road that this historic mansion is on.
I
So
was
what
just trying to
we,
figure out
what we,
why this building was up in question and why it was being evaluated. That's really what I was trying to get at.
Oh, he was trying
Why
to-
this particular building?
I think he was trying to locate it because the address didn't make sense, which was one of these situations, which is why the master list has not just the addresses that are the official addresses, but also the parcel numbers, so we can help identify the locations.
Right, no, I was asking about the building you were talking about, this mill building. What brought the questions about? Did a neighbor say there's a building falling down? Like, do you have community people talking about the building?
This was a building on our list, and I was having trouble finding it. So I had a description of it, like that sheet. I had some history on it. It said it was being rented out. That turned out not to be true. So
Okay.
I was just trying to update this property that was on lists since 2007 and then was refreshed in 2014. And now I was going back to see, like what was going on with it.
Right, but I was just trying to figure out what started the process and, do neighbors call and all? That's what I was trying to get at.
Okay.
Okay,
I think
but I would love to
the-
go drive by and see the building when I
I
get
think
the
it's the
address.
normal, this is sort of what I think Steve was describing is the normal course of survey update. So what you do is you methodically go through the list and you make sure, like you said, every couple of years, visit the property. And in this case, he was just trying to find it, but you make sure that A, it's still there, B, no one has turned it into a McDonald's, C, that it's, one of the nice things about regularly updating this is that sort of in addition to that serving the needs of the ordinance, the greater mission of the Historical Commission is to see just the situation Steve described. Like here, we met the owner, he's having trouble, maybe we can connect that owner with resources and not just in the township, but maybe there are grants, maybe there is, some kind of incentive or tax breaks. Hopefully, the Historical Commission can be a resource, for these property owners to actually invest in their properties, which benefits not just them, but the
And-
greater community.
And has the township, during the time you're Steve, right? Has the township done anything like that with any property owners, helping them get funding, supported? a tax-
No, because there's no ordinance.
Well, I know there's no ordinance, but I didn't know if there was also just something happening with no formal.
Well, I've only been, I'm only 2 years on this.
Okay.
There's probably a lot of history in the past that is lost, but
So I had a procedural question. So the ordinance outlines both at the commission level and at the council level, sort of steps that the, I guess, property owner would have to go through, or the property would be subject to upon designation, like a new designation to be added to the list. So, but the list already exists with properties on there now before the ordinance has been enacted. Was there a similar process already happening, just not pursuant to like a ordinance for properties already there? And if not, what's the because I'm putting myself in the shoes of the property owner who may be on the list now, and they may not think anything could really come of it because there is an ordinance, but then one day there is ordinance. And so now they don't have the same, I guess, let's call it lowercase d due process as someone else who's newly being appointed on the list. Has that been taken into consideration? What's going to happen with the people that are, or the properties that are there now? And because I can anticipate, I'm sure maybe you have too, that some people, now that there's maybe some recourse to maybe push back, or if they disagree with the designation or the criteria that was selected, if any. Has that been taken into consideration? Because I'm thinking that may be a potential issue.
Yeah. So I think one of our jobs is to outline the advantages of preservation and the advantage of restoring a building. But there are going to be, I'll give you a good example. I have a house that's 103 years old right here in Beverly Hills. Had a slate roof when we moved in there, and it was leaking, and we had it evaluated, and we got estimates, and I couldn't afford putting another slate roof on, you know. So I think in our community, we've got to be reasonable, you know. I think if this was a case before the Historical Commission, we could suggest a dimensional roofing material that would look something like slate. You know, that would be, we would try to,
But you're talking about if they're doing something to the house to
Yeah.
change it physically.
right,
What I'm talking about is placement on the list
in
You give it,
the
like-
first place.
in the first place. So if Josh is my neighbor, my house is currently on the survey, his house isn't. After this ordinance gets in place, we find like, oh, there's actually similar historic qualities on both properties. They probably both should be on there. And so his property goes through this process. He has the opportunity to appear both before the commission and before the council to hear, you know, the commission put on their case, maybe agree with some things, maybe disagree with some things, whatever the case may be, however it plays out is how it plays out. But he has that opportunity and I didn't. I may feel like maybe my property should be taken off that list until I get that same opportunity.
It was kind of my same question about like, how are we grandfathering, or what's the process for?
Just to clarify, this is the first time that there is any process for, there's no difference between Josh's property being added later versus your property being on it now, because we're going through that process now. So the advertisement of the list and the notification of the homeowners, they'll have the same public hearing that you'd have for a property that gets added to the list in the future. So we're just doing a whole lot of them all at once versus a few at a time. That might happen as we add 1 or 5 in a given year. But the process is functionally the same. The homeowner the property owner gets notified, and then they have a public hearing, and then township council has to vote on whether or not to add it to the list.
Although technically there wouldn't be a historical commission review because there is no commission yet, right?
Well, the historical commission suggests properties for inclusion, and township council
Okay, and
acts.
so they've already done this
So this is-
informally.
Right, so this, essentially the same process would happen. There's the historical commission, which has been meeting publicly for, several decades now, meets, discusses things, makes suggestions to township council for action. At that time, and then it gets advertised, gets put on the agenda, people get notified. That's the stage at which people can come and have be heard before the township council actually acts on their property. And that's happening for all these properties now, and it will happen for individual properties in the future.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand. So at the council level, what would be considered is the inclusion of these properties on the designated list or the approval of the ordinance as a whole? Because those are two separate.
Both. So the ordinance is a dead letter without a list to inform it. So what township council is voting on will be the ordinance and the list.
So once a property is determined to be on the list, is there going to be, as far as notification, as the property changes hands, will there be a deed restriction, or what kind of notification will be bound on the homeowner to tell the next homeowner that, hey, you're buying a house that's on this list?
That sounds like a good idea.
Well, I have a little bit of real estate background, and I also have a bit having dealt with Historic Association in Harrisburg, homeowners association there, where we frequently ran into inadequate communication, and someone would buy a home not knowing they were subject to the restrictions, and then lawsuits fly.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if it's the appropriate thing to go all the way to a deed restriction. That's what we did back then, is you were deed restricted, and then you could point to that and say, as part of this real estate transaction, you are buying a house that is subject to oversight by third party and is no longer just your prerogative what you do with your windowsills. And that can avoid a lot of headache for both sides, people who'd like to preserve and the people who didn't realize what they got themselves into with buying a property that they can't paint the windowsills pink.
Okay.
How many properties are on the list now?
200 some.
And
And some of them are very modest and not in great shape. For instance, there's a row of 3 or 4 houses they were sort of workers in the mill, right? And so they're on the list because of that. There's a farmhouse that's also cut up and being rented out, and it's not in very good shape also. But we have no opportunity to even try to help preserve these now because we have no ordinance. Even buildings that are designated landmarks have no protection unless a local body like this passes an ordinance, and, it's the strongest protection you can have.
on this commission, it sounds as if a grant writer or a grant researcher might be advantageous as a member. Is that
Yeah.
something to consider?
Yeah, sure. We actually used, I heard about a grant that was a substantial $500,000 grant. And we got the township's grant writers to help write the proposal for that. That was for the, what do I want to say? That was for the, no, I just can't think of.
For Collenbrook?
I'm blanking on the property.
For
but-
Collenbrook?
Yeah, no, it wasn't Collenbrook. It's over here.
The historical markers we got?
No, on the property with the church.
Oh, Sellers Hall.
So, okay. Sellers Hall, I'm sorry about that. But there's a really kind of impressive board on, that's responsible for Sellers Hall. So we just connected those 2 people and they applied for a grant.
Well, I guess more what I should have asked then, will there be a grant researcher? Because you just happened to come upon a grant.
Right.
It sounds as if you're, with 200+ properties, you're going to need someone who is really quite knowledgeable
Yeah,
and has
right.
a background in grant research,
Right.
not just writing.
I think once we get this passed, I'm hoping for a budget.
Are you now?
Because they definitely spent money on it in the past. So I'm hoping for a budget to at least get some outsourced resources for that kind of thing, yes.
The commission meets monthly currently, is that right? Or?
Yes.
no? Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you know any good grant researchers, please forward their resumes to historical, I think it's Historical Commission at upperdarby.org, because we will have to make appointments to this board.
And are you finding a budget for this?
That is a question for Township Council, who passes the budget.
I see, said the blind man.
Is
Sorry.
the ordinance as we were given it, is this its final form, or is there still more work to be done before you see it going to
the
Good
next steps?
question. It's gone through 3 rounds with 2 different lawyers. So I think it's pretty solid now. It did get a review from Kate Clifford again, and she made some suggestions. Those haven't been folded in yet, but we have, since they announced, the solicitor said it's going to be 2 to 6 months before we even get to the point where it's, so we have time.
So to piggy off that, the reason I was asking, I couldn't remember if you were meeting monthly or every other month, is the nomination section, what is this? Section 5C1 doesn't seem to work on paper. It says that the Historical Commission should hold at least one public meeting to receive public comments about a nomination. Built into that, assuming the fact that sometimes you might have a more complicated property that maybe needs more than one meeting, or something happens at a meeting where you need to come back. But the very next section doesn't allow you to do that because it says you have to,
Transmit the findings.
within 45 days
Yeah.
from the nomination. So if you meet every month, that's not possible.
Right.
So that's kind of piggybacking off of the last question, because that just can't happen. That just won't work. So I think
Well,
that section needs to be revised.
Steve,
Yeah,
what section was that?
5C.
Basically it's saying we meet monthly, but if you meet after the nomination, you're not going to be able to be in front of council have a submission 15 days after your meeting, because your next meeting is at least a month from the last meeting,
okay.
right? Am I miss?
When you're saying nomination, I believe there's a series of timelines that kick in at various events. And one of the reasons why they have the meeting monthly is to make sure that they're always meeting within the window by which they're required to act. So the Historical Commission has a certain amount of time from a permit being referred to it to meet, or else it's deemed approved. And then once they hear it, right, then there's a process that starts with the applicant. And then there's a period of time that they have, once they get all the information from the applicant, once they get all their questions answered and all the materials they requested, then once they have everything together, then there's a clock that starts for them to get a recommendation to Township Council.
Right, no, I understand
Yeah.
that, but the way it's written, that clock starts when you receive the nomination.
For
not
the
way-
for the first stage of it. They have to have the hearing within that first period of time, unless the final version is not the version that the way we wrote it. But there will be a series of changes to that. And one of the things I wanted to say is that this body, your suggestions are taken into account. So one of the reasons why we bring it first to this body and then also to the Delaware County Planning Commission is that your comments and feedback then get presented to the Township Council. Currently, this ordinance, it's no longer in possession of the Historical Commission. We referred it to Township Council. It's currently been taken up as a matter of business for them. They did the initial reading, or the initial introduction of it, and then tabled it pending receipt of comments from this body in Delaware County. So there is going to be adjustments made, because there are obviously, you could have all the solicitors in the world review it, and you're going to catch things that, well, this could be a good idea. Why don't we do this? Or you'll catch something that they missed. So if you do have specific issues with the timeline, I would say put it in writing and make sure we get those comments. And those Township Council will incorporate that feedback in their final ordinance.
Just one more question, I'm sorry. How is the commission being advertised so that homeowners, potential buyers even know about you?
So the Historical Commission has been meeting, in fact, since the mid-1970s. It was created formally by resolution in the early 1990s. Every year, a series of meetings is advertised in the paper, just like all of our other public meetings. We publish those meetings, the meeting notices on our website, they're on the township calendars. I'm sure we could probably, once this process, which will reconstitute the commission and give it this specific, the ordinance also includes the new governance of the commission, right? So the way we organized it since 1991 will go away. We'll have this new process. I think it might be a good opportunity. We'll request it gets included in the next township newsletter. But the same way we promote any of our other, like this body, for example, or the zoning hearing board. If there are specific hearings that have to happen, I could be wrong. Again, this is advice of solicitor. I believe we might have to advertise when we actually have a property to consider, like an actual permit being applied for. I believe we have to advertise for that specifically. But,
Yeah.
we have the regular meetings, but then the regular meetings don't always involve, an applicant. Uh, In any given year, I don't think these 200 properties have that many permits that come up. And generally, there's other work that the Historical Commission does in between these hearings. This is not the only work of the commission. So the regularly scheduled meeting is where those hearings will be held. And they also have the ability to advertise a special meeting if they needed to fit a certain deadline or have additional meetings. So all of that is to say, we inform the public through a number of methods. I'm sure we could probably do a better job, and we welcome everyone sharing this information with their neighbors, because we want people to be aware of the Historical Commission.
I do have another question. Steve, about how many of the people do you think, if you had a wild card guess, do you think will be happy about knowing this is an official protection of the property that they have cared for and will care for, and we'll turn it over someday to somebody else? How many of them, just wild card?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Okay.
But I'm hoping that people will be pleased about it. I hope that we can communicate it in a way that's advantageous and visual. For instance, again, to take my house, I've just restored the front windows of my house. It's easy for me to take a picture of somebody else who's replaced them and my restored windows and show that to someone. So I see part of this eventually having style guidelines that you can show people, and they do exist. I mean, there are existing ones already, but I think we would need them more specifically for this community because the housing stock's a little different.
Because why?
But, yeah,
You said because.
what?
You said because, and then I couldn't understand what you said
Oh,
after.
no. I don't know what I was
Because
saying.
the housing, because the housing stock's a little different in this community than it is in some other communities.
Okay.
Yeah. Because, so, in other words, the existing style guidelines cover Gothic revival, they cover, various types of housing, like colonial. Well, my house is considered a colonial, but it doesn't look anything like what the examples are from the National Park Service. So
Okay.
we won't be able to just use them like that. There's one for Delaware County too, but it's not specific to our area. So at any rate, this is beyond what we're discussing here, but it's my hope to provide people with a style guideline for their neighborhood. And it's not enforceable. It's just like, here's a good idea, put this kind of storm door on and not that kind. So,
And just for commission members, staff, Josh, representing staff, has a few comments also.
Yep, so I have a couple comments that we came up with as we were going over this application. Hopefully, if you guys like them, we can incorporate them into the comments in your letter. I guess the first question that I have is section 3 definitions for alteration or alter. Does the alteration include adding of antennas, billboards, or solar panels? Antennas and billboards, something that I specifically see a lot on 69th Street, something that I see on a lot of historic buildings. And I don't know if this really is clear enough to, make note of that. So that would be a comment of maybe adding a little bit of clarity for antennas and billboards. And then also, I think it would be wise to have some sort of clarity with solar panels as well, because you don't want people to be deterred by having this historic house that they can't do solar. I know there's a way that you can do both. We might just want to go that extra mile and provide a little bit of detail at this time. Good. I'm just going to flip through. Section 6, under resources, we talk about building permits. We also might want to clarify a siding permit as well, and maybe talk to L&I about the different kind of permits that would have an effect on the exterior. It's not always a building permit. So
All
that,
right, what kind of permit? I didn't hear that.
a siding permit.
Outside.
So that's right, something that definitely could affect the exterior or the historical aspect of the house. For the in-kind maintenance and repair, I definitely need clarification for that last sentence, for that paragraph. I didn't understand it, so if,
So if you can submit all this in writing,
yep, it will.
we'll just take it to the solicitor and ask them to make the changes, because
Right, well, I mean, I would also want you to take it to
Council
the,
have to make yeah. There'd have to be a suggested amendment that, well,
Okay.
but same.
yeah, or the historical commission as well, to get their thoughts, right? You'd want really us talking to them and then them making those changes and then giving those changes to council, or, right, council making those changes through amendment, one of the two.
Whatever format we go through to get it to council, ultimately.
Sure.
Right now, the ordinance is an item of business possessed by township council as is, so any amendments to it ultimately are their prerogative. But yeah, we should have a conversation with the solicitor and make sure we understand the comments before we, we're happy to help. We're happy to help you develop the letter that gets submitted to council, is what I'm saying.
So section 7A, we talk a lot about building permit. We might want to just add a short something in there that says that there should be a section on the building permit that has a box for historic and non-historic. If we write it in here, then, right, if someone submits a permit without it, then that permit can technically be denied, and you don't have to get into timeline things, which I know this has a section on, but I think it would provide some simplicity. So we already talked about this one, section 7C, but I raised the question, was there a requirement to print in the paper? We're going to look into that, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. I think I had two. Section 9H, in the cases where council approved the issuance of the permit, would the permit be good for a 6-month period upon written request, unless the township agrees? So I wrote, would there be a second resolution? Because I think the way that it was written made me think like you would need one resolution to start it and then another resolution for it to be approved.
I don't think I follow. What section are we talking about?
So I have this under section 9H.
Do you mind reading it?
Yeah, and so in cases where council approved the issuance of a permit, the permit will be good for 6-month period unless upon written request, township council agrees to permit an extension.
Oh, that's if a property owner can't get the job, as you know, construction projects don't always happen in a tidy timeline. It just gives the council the opportunity to extend. It's not automatically the case that, you would just lose the permit automatically and have to start from scratch. But yeah, I believe that probably would have to go before.
So all
That's a
I'm
matter
asking
of
is, would
council
that require a
business.
resolution?
That probably requires, at the very least, a motion and vote by council.
Okay.
But I would think probably resolution.
Okay.
Wait, you guys are talking about extending, what would, the thing that would be requiring the resolution is the extension of the permit? Is that what you guys are talking about?
I believe so.
Yeah, because normally an approval of a permit, right? I mean, a permit has sort of a timeline. And because council is in charge of the final approval of this permit, it's just council is also voting on the extension.
Is 6 months, I guess this is a question for Josh. Is 6 months, let's say this is not, let's take the historical designation out of it. Just permits in general, is this 6 months typically?
Is that reasonable?
Is that the same as if it was a regular permit? If it was the same permit, not in a historical designation, would it be 6 months?
I believe so, but I'll have to check. I mean, that falls more under our permit officers. They do that on the day-to-day, but I could find that out for sure. You probably want to make it consistent with whatever that timeline is.
That's what I'm
I
asking.
believe it's
because
6.
Otherwise, the distinction, I don't see a reason for why the discrepancy. If there is a discrepancy.
Yeah.
I don't.
Well, it's harder to get historic people in, it's harder to get that stuff done.
All right, but we don't know if this is shorter or longer. I don't know. council raised the issue of the approval from council.
But wouldn't the historic one be longer, just naturally?
I don't know. That's my question. Is this the same? Is it longer? Is it short? I don't know.
And the permit, correct me if I'm wrong, Josh, but when you issued a permit, it's the 6-month period is for you to start the project, not for completion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I think
That's for
even if
shovel
it
on
takes
the
a little bit longer, it's just, it's similar to like a zoning variance. If you get a zoning variance and you don't break ground in the course of, I believe, a year, you'll lose it, right? I mean, it's like, you got to go back to the start. So here, it's if you have a 6-month permit, it's just to get started on the project, to begin, whatever site prep.
Because the way it's written, is the permit is good for 6 months. So if that's what's the intention, then that needs to be revised.
Yeah, I think that's standard for all permits, that a permit enables you to start, not necessarily, it's sort of, it's not like it's a time limit for you to finish the job. It's just, you're allowed to start within that time period. I think that's true for all of our permits.
Is that the end of the comments?
No, one or two more. Section 11, A7, it talks about adopted design guidelines. Is that something you have? And then kind of a follow-up on that, under section C, right below it, it references submitting guidelines for each historic resource. Would it not make more sense to do it by district instead of per resource?
I think it says, doesn't, I don't know if it says this specifically, but we're starting out by just using the existing guidelines. And it should say that in there, at least that was one back and forth with the lawyer through email that
It just says there should be separate and distinct guidelines for historic resource and alteration desired.
okay, so the guidelines we'll have, we'll use the.
Oh, no, I see, the Secretary of Interior standards for rehab. Is that what you're referencing?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, but is there a point where you do districts, to be more specific?
We don't have historic districts, just individual properties, but yes, I would love to do that in the future.
I think that's like sort of the next generation of this project, because that creating historic districts, not only do you need to have distinct style guidelines for those specific districts, once you have historic districts, it also, there's other requirements for the composition of your board and who's supposed to be on it. And so when we get to that point, when we have historic districts someday, hopefully, that would be yet another amendment to the ordinance where we would, incorporate those guidelines as well as having the required expertise on the board needed to enforce them.
And then my very last comment, thanks for bearing with me, section 13, demolition by neglect, under, I think it's E5, it says specifically, like, the zoning officer will be the one declaring demolition by neglect. Is there some sort of appeal for that?
Is there a what from?
An appeal? Who does that go to? Does it go to the commission? Does it go to the zoning hearing board?
Yeah, I don't know.
That would definitely be something I'd be curious about, because, right, someone should say, no, we're not, and then,
I mean, that's going to need its own set of
right.
regulations and standards.
So there should be some sort of appeal for the demolition by neglect, is my guess, because the only thing it says in appeals, and it's really focused more on the building permit. It's not focused on me declaring, or sorry, the zoning officer declaring demolition by neglect. So something to think about. So that's all I have. You guys can choose to incorporate those into your comments as well, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yes.
And just to answer that, I believe, and I'll have to double check the solicitor on this, because just one thing to be aware of is that this ordinance as is not particularly innovative. It's based on ordinances that are in effect in other communities. I think particularly Narberth is the one that's closest to it. I believe that the zoning by neglect thing, and this is something we'll confirm with the solicitor, it's the same as any other code enforcement violation. Gets eventually would go to the Court of Common Pleas, but there may be another process. Yeah, that's a good question, because you're acting as the zoning officer.
Makes me think zoning hearing board.
Right. It's important to know, so let's make sure we got that distinction written out.
And when you issue zoning violations though, but don't you usually have to cite a specific, you have to be in violation of a specific standard? Demolition by neglect, there has to be, that's a term of art, right? So wouldn't there have to be, maybe there is one, I don't know.
I think,
I think there is.
I think they go through and define, yeah. They give a section of what it can be characterized by under 13D.
13.
D, I think would be,
The one building we showed with the third story going on, that was a demolition by neglect, possibly, because, yeah, because they came in and gutted the building, or they didn't gut the building. They came in, the first thing they did was take all the windows out, and it stood open through a whole winter. So that's what we were afraid that they were doing that. Now, I mentioned it to the mayor, and she said, oh, we have certain, that's a couple code violations. And so somebody went and talked to them, and they did put up boards over the lower windows, but the attic was still wide open. So that's the kind of thing where, I mean, that's demolition by neglect, is just letting a building fall down so that you can say, hey, it's not salvageable anymore.
Yeah, and I think it all hinges on specific violations of our, if it wasn't demolition by neglect, you'd still be cited for code violations. But taken in there, the criteria lays out, if it's in this context, several kinds of these violations, and obviously you're not addressing them, and it's demolition by neglect is composed of multiple little incidences of normal code violations.
So I think, kind of in summary, what you've heard mostly from the commission is that our preoccupation with process. That's, and how, from start getting on to how does your house get on? How do you communicate this to all potential homeowners of the property now and forever? How does the process work as things get changed? What are the timelines, and what are the various definitions? So what you're looking for from us tonight is essentially a letter with comments and comments, recommendations, and so on.
yeah, don't forget public comment as well. But after that, yeah, a recommendation with, approval, revise and resubmit, or approval with comments. Generally the three that you choose from.
Okay, so amongst the commission members, any,
Hold on, let's get public comment first.
oh, geez,
And
yes,
I- and I
I'm
just
sorry.
Yeah, you
We
can.
need public.
Public
we need-
comment right
we
now.
need-
Public and
Yeah, we need other public. We need to allow the rest.
It
of
might
the
not be
public.
anybody, but at least
Yes.
give the chance.
And we also, I mean, I just want to be clear, we love process as well. And part of I've been excited about this meeting for a while, because getting more people with, educated brains on these topics to pay attention to this and make this a better ordinance is ultimately, it's a gift. So, and we look forward to what members of the public have to say as well, because no one wants to just ram something imperfect down everyone's throats. We want this to be the best ordinance it could be.
Right,
We want this to
right.
be something the community is proud of.
Right. Yes, exactly. And if we, good defined process, we'll get us success on all these goals. Is there any member of the public that would like to come forward and make any comments about the proposed ordinance? Okay, so seeing none amongst us, does anybody have a motion for how you'd like to word our path forward letter-wise? Jeff, you look like you had something going.
No, I was going to say, I guess, approve.
Approve with comments. Yeah. I second.
Second, is there any concerns about that? So I would say that the comments would be Josh's comments. And I think the rest of our comments were somewhat summarized in clarifying process definitions and so on, that we would want to see that tightened up together with Josh's specific points. Anything else in particular that need to be in the letter?
Well, I'm still a little gray on how will the buildings get selected? Like, you talked about, it, but I didn't really think that, like, suppose there's 5 in the same street. I mean, it's all 5 or none?
No. So the buildings are selected on their individual merits, or like you say, in the event of historical district, if they fit into that definition, but we're not going there yet. But there are criteria that the National Park Service puts out. And one of the things in the exhibits accompanying the ordinance is sort of an easy to read summary of the list, which we provide those criteria. And for each property, we say it meets, criteria A, B, K, and J, right? Or, so there's a well-established set of criteria that are used not just by this body, but other bodies like it around the country. And so over the course of, well, I guess a couple decades now, this been a research project by the Delaware County Heritage Commission and the Upper Darby Historical Commission in partnership with them. And they spent, they did this pretty intensively in 2007 and 2012. They went out and visited properties, took pictures, did a write-up for each property. And that's the survey that we've been updating and now hopefully codifying in an ordinance. But it's this survey criteria here. So associated with an event that is significant in the history of Upper Darby Township, Delaware County, Commonwealth, or the nation. So for example, your George Washington slept here kind of places might fit that criteria if he gave a speech, right? That is representative of broad patterns of development, heritage, or culture. That could be something like, the last example of the mills that were once typical along Darby Creek. Is associated with persons or groups of people of significance to the history of the culture of Upper Darby Township. Embodies distinctive characteristics of architecture. So that's where you get into like the 69th Street area, the commercial buildings that are, especially the ones designed by John McClatchy, the Mayan Revival buildings. These are the things that sort of make this proposed Art Deco district that people have written about in the press. That's a distinctive characteristic of Upper Darby architecture. The McClatchy building is sort of it would fit number 5 as well. It contains elements of design, detail, materials, or craftsmanship which represent a significant innovation. I challenge you to find a building even remotely similar to that. And similar, contains the work of a notable architect, landscape architect, artist, craftsperson, builder, or developer. So the McClatchy building at the corner of 69th and Market would fit right away 4, 5, and 6 as criteria for
Well,
inclusion.
that one's easier to put
Yeah.
on, but I'm just, is there something in there to protect the township and the people from fighting about, well, we don't want to be on the list?
Well, they can,
Yeah.
It's part of the.
Well, it doesn't mean they can't argue it.
they can argue it, and that's what the public hearing is for. Yeah.
Right, I think you said earlier, ultimately
Right.
council will decide
Right.
if it should be on the list, which I would think if somebody's
Right, there's an
putting up a big fight
opportunity
about it, they
to fight it.
fine, you'll be-
Oh, okay.
Right.
That's what I was trying to figure out from you, how many buildings and properties you think that people are going to be happy about this. I was just trying to get my vision, is it something that 90 people are going to say, yay, we finally have this, we can sell our house and be confident, or most of them are going to be unhappy?
I think it depends on the individual. I think, when you have when you have these, over, the reason why we have these bodies in the first place is because there are many people who are happy to just simply, demolish a historic building. We spent the past century watching historic building after historic building after historic building disappear with no recourse. We have our Underground Railroad trail. Several of those buildings no longer exists, and they are very significant historical buildings. So there's always people who are not going to be happy that they're included on such a list, and whether or not they ultimately are included in such a list is a public discussion between township council, members of the public. Community will ultimately arrive at whatever compromises they need to arrive at, and some people may be happy, some people may not be happy, but that's the process.
Question about our motion.
Okay.
If we, I guess this is for the board and also for Josh. If we're voting for recommendation pursuant to our comments, some of our comments are, including some of the staff comments, are not generally, they're not just like overarching kind of comments of thoughts on the overarching ordinance, it's actual specific language changes. In that case, if council decides to adopt any of those comments, do we see this again? Or I just want a refresher on how that works.
No, you would just give those comments, and then they could either make the changes now, or they could just have, right, like sort of addendum attached to it to give to council, and then it gets adopted with them. I think there's so much time that they could probably change the ordinance to include the comments. But no, if you recommend approval, it technically won't come back here.
Okay, and so basically our choices are.
No matter what, the comments are still gonna get sent to council though, with your approval. So no matter what, those comments, right? I mean, we can maybe mark if they've been addressed or not, but we're gonna get right that one pager that says what our comments were and then an approval, and that gets attached to it when it goes.
Okay, so we have a first and a second. And we've had some discussion and further clarification. Would like to take a vote. Is all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Good, Josh? Okay. Well, thank you, members of the Historic Commission. Next up, we are going to talk about the shade tree ordinance. I know there's someone from the Shade Tree Shade Tree Commission here. Will there be a specific presentation, or are we just going to do free-form questions?
Just as a reminder, this is not something you guys will be voting on. This is purely just your opinion. This is not part of the zoning or saldo.
I'm Mike Atwell of 314 Wayne Avenue in Upper Darby, member of the Tree Commission. We are now a commission of 2 people, as we had one resignation and haven't filled the second position yet. Our mission, I think Evan Hunt is here as well, who is the other commission member, and I think he can talk a little bit about the mission of the commission. But our goal in updating the ordinance was to have it be a little more actionable, a little more responsible in light of what we know about the environment today. And I think specifically, well, I have some questions that this commission might be able to help with in very general ways. And Josh is familiar with these because Josh helped us put this proposed ordinance draft together. And one of the biggest ones is how to make residents of Upper Darby aware that there is an ordinance and what it says and what it allows and doesn't allow or expects, like the effectiveness of an ordinance, whether the draft we have now is adequate for what we're trying to achieve, and that is to at least maintain the level of tree cover that we have, or ideally improve it, and enforceability. So those are like things that I don't have any experience with. I've been on the commission for about 1.5 years, just as an interested resident. So I don't know if you've even had time to review this ordinance. It's a little bit lengthy.
We talked about this last month, right?
Yes, yeah. we
Okay, okay. I might have been traveling. So I don't know if you have questions, or Evan, do you want to talk a little bit specifically about the ordinance, or should we just kind of open it up?
Yeah.
What's your preference?
Yeah, I think we're good if we just open it up. I know,
Okay.
does anybody have a question ready they want to go
I
with?
mean, I understood it. This ordinance is to regulate the trees within the township's right of way.
Right, within the right of way.
Within the right of way.
Right, correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll say a little bit more about it. So, yeah, so the goal of the ordinance was to kind of update the existing shade tree ordinance, which I think was adopted in like the 70s. And I don't think too many people know about it. It's not-
I'm sorry, I'm old. I need for
Oh.
you to speak a little louder.
Sorry about that. So we're updating the currently existing ordinance that was passed in like the 70s. And I don't think too many people know about it. It's not really enforced, but the goal is to just regulate like what trees can be planted, removed, pruned in like township-owned properties. So that's the right-of-way, like you mentioned, which is like the space in between the sidewalk and the street. then also parks owned by the township, and then also like other municipal properties like this building, like municipal parking lots. I guess the community center is like another good example. The libraries are a good example. So I think the big thing that we added to the ordinance was kind of like a requirement to replace trees if they're removed. Just if there's like some sort of development project, or if there's like someone removes trees for any other reason. We also added something about prohibiting the planting of invasive species. And then we also added like a requirement to ground out stumps if you remove a tree, not to leave the stumps in the ground. But other than that, we kind of just updated like the existing language, like made it a little more like modern, a little more up to date with today's like standards and language.
So no, overall, I thought it was a good update. The stump grinding, who enforces that? That like a code enforcement thing? Or somebody would have to call? Kinda-
Yeah, I mean, it would probably go to the mayor's request line.
Okay.
Then it would be up to the administration how they want to divvy that out. I know my only comment here is that we should just change the one section where permits go through LNI for permits to go through leisure services with the restructuring. But, so my guess would be maybe through Bill, but I think that's more, right, that'll kind of become administrative.
As I read through it, I just kept wondering the same thing as you about enforcement. Because on my block alone, in the 14 or 15 years that I've lived there, I've seen a couple of trees felled for absolutely no reason, but hey, I can't see when I'm backing out of my driveway.
Or I don't want to rake the leaves.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
that too.
Right.
So I mean, who enforces that?
Yes, I think that's the main reason we added like the tree replacement section, because like normally what happens is someone cuts down a tree that happens so fast, and we don't hear about it until a neighbor reports it usually. That's how we hear about most of these things. And then at that point, we would go to the homeowner, and there's like the requirement to replace trees. So they would either have to replace the tree like on their property, or they'd have to pay some sort of fee to the township, and the township would take that money and then plant trees elsewhere in the township. And the idea is that it's supposed to be like a tree and species that, equal to what was cut down. So you're not really getting like a net loss of trees overall.
But I think in answer to your question, we do, any ordinance like this sort of relies upon neighbors and township employees that happen to come upon this work. And that's a serious challenge to be aware of what happened on your block or what's happened in my neighborhood as well. I don't know of an ideal way to be aware of, actions that residents are taking that are like contrary to the ordinance. Josh, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think for a while, it's going to be more just getting people familiar when they come in and ask a question of, hey, do I have to get a permit to take down my tree? And then we walk them through that process. It's probably going to be more getting people familiar with that process and word of mouth of, oh, if you want to do this, you need to do that, than probably actively going after people who have done it. That would be my assumption until you establish some sort of recognition in the township.
I think a gatekeeper in this, though, would be arborists and tree services that work in Upper Darby. Because, if you hire an electrician, they're aware of what the code is, or ideally, they are aware of what the code is and so on, right? And they're the ones that come in and a resident calls XYZ tree service, yeah, and they'll give them a quote, and the tree is down in 2 days, and there's a stump left in the tree lawn forever.
Yeah, I think the difference there is with electricians and things of that nature. If they deviate from their code, they put their licenses at risk. I don't know if that's the case with arborists and stuff, so maybe there's not an incentive there to do that, you would hope.
Right.
But I don't, maybe there is an arborist license, I don't know.
You can get
But
contractor's license, maybe.
maybe, yeah, but I don't know if not replacing tree, there's governing bodies for those
Yeah.
licenses that dictate, which, we can't control that. We can certainly
Sure.
encourage, but yeah, that would be
Maybe
ideal.
we're saying
yeah.
there are multiple points. There
Right.
are residents, there are, the township employees and then some of the tree services that are active enough or care, to be aware of those kind of things.
Well, just recently I got a piece of paper or pamphlet, I can't even remember, stuck in my door saying, you can't just dig anywhere.
Right.
Why can't something like that be done? It needs to be that obvious
Yeah.
that you can't just fell a tree. That's not your prerogative.
In your backyard, and to make it clear, like, if it's not the right of way, if it's not in, if it's in your backyard that doesn't fit the definitions of our right of way, then you can, but yeah, no, that's.
But a lot of people don't even, I did not know what right of way was until I got on the board.
Yes.
So I would imagine there are many people like me who are ignorant of what is considered what you can do and where you can and where you cannot.
Sure.
So that just reminded me, this was a question I had. I didn't remember it because I know we talked about this last month, but I knew I had a question. I just couldn't remember what it was. But I think we were discussing whether the shade tree definition of right of way matches like just the general zoning code definition of right of way, if there's any deviation that would cause an issue. I don't know if we figured that, got to the bottom of that. Do you remember that? Does that ring?
Sort of, but I think Josh might be, I think right away is right away, right? I don't think it's as gray as we might be thinking it is.
Because we do define it.
Right, so my question, I agree, I don't think it's gray either. I just, if there's a deviation in the definition in this ordinance versus just the general zoning ordinance, it may be nominal, it may not matter, but if it does matter, it's better to
We should just button it up.
button it up now
Yeah.
than have to deal with it down the line.
Sure.
Yeah.
Not that we have to do it like.
Yeah, right away in the zoning code is just very simple. It's land set aside for public use or ownership as a street, sidewalk, crosswalk, drainage way, utility course, or similar facility. So it's actually a lot more general than the right of way that they propose here, which might be beneficial.
It's better that way, right?
Yeah.
Because you can certainly see someone saying, well, it's not, that's the only, that's the only kind of, if they want to push back on having it, well, it's not in the right of way because this says the right of way is this and this is the right of way is that. But if it's an option, then good. The another question I had regarding the tree replacement systems, that it references that if a homeowner doesn't have financial means to replace a tree, the commission shall connect the homeowner with a local environmental group that will assist with creating a replacement plan at no cost to owner. Part A of my question is there like a list of environmental groups that you guys kind of routinely go to that's available to the, I guess, public? And two, that will kind of imply, is there some sort of agreement that the township has with these groups, or, because we're putting an onus on these environmental groups? I don't know what their funding is like, I don't know, from year to year, whether they can be beholden to this or not. So that's something just to put a thought into as well.
Yeah, so the group we work with all the time is the Tree Tenders of Upper Darby, and they're like a subset of the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society. So they've been around since like 2019 in the township. And yeah, their whole mission is like provide free trees for residents to put on the street. And they get like subsidized trees from the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society. So that's the group we were referencing there.
Well, wait a minute. You're saying that they are the ones that donate the tree?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, what about the care, feeding, management, pruning? What
Yeah,
about
so,
that?
yeah, that's up to the homeowner. And part of what the group does is they train the homeowner in like best practices for taking care of the trees after they're planted.
Okay, but that gets back to who has the money for this?
For maintenance?
Yeah.
Well, it's on someone's property. They have to make, not.
No, but it's in the right
It's
of
in
way.
the
Right, it's in
yeah.
the right of way.
The township takes care of it.
It's like a
So I mean,
sidewalk.
at some point, if you're going to say, well, you have to do this, And if you don't have the money,
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
it's
if it
just
comes
like,
between your roof and a tree,
Yeah.
the tree loses.
There's not gonna be many right-of-ways that are that close to your house. But I'm talking about the trees that are in like cellars, right? The township's gonna take care of that.
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. So it's just like maintenance for like that you do in the right of way now. Like most people have grass and they're responsible for mowing it the same way they'd be responsible for doing maintenance of the tree. And it usually only like it like consists of like pruning and maybe watering for the first year or two. And then after that, there's not much maintenance you have to do. But yeah, I mean, the homeowner like overall is responsible.
The homeowner is also responsible for like cracks and tripping hazards on the concrete in front of their house.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it'd be the same, it's the same rules.
right. They don't do great with those either. And
Right,
I mean,
but
there's
it
so
is-
many, there's
Well,
so
it comes with
many.
being a homeowner.
Yeah, but it's, again, part of the education of you bought the house, this is your responsibility.
And so what happens when there's an invasive bug like the, what is it?
Lantern flies.
Yeah, the lanternfly. I mean, who is responsible for, keeping up the good fight against that?
Essentially, it's the homeowner, it's your tree.
Okay.
That is the, right, that's the case now. It's not being changed, right?
I just, how are you going to enforce that?
How do you
Right.
enforce speeders? Same thing.
It's- right.
The whole premise is really, the way I understand it is to make people aware of the value and just to
Right.
remind them.
Yes.
That nobody's gonna be running down the street with a machine gun shooting people that don't do it, so.
Yeah.
We should be okay.
I think it's also to preserve what's left of the tree canopy and encourage more growth
And
as well.
remind people of the value. It's a reminder.
So I have a question outside of the ordinance. So if a homeowner contacts the Shade Tree Commission, you will help them facilitate tree planting? If they want.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we do
Okay.
it every spring and fall in township properties and rights of way. Westchester Pike, the entire tree canopy on Westchester Pike is probably is the result of tree commission work over the years, way before I joined.
Yeah, that's the main thing we do is we plant in, we're doing like what, like 25 trees this spring. We focus primarily on like parks and then like more like, I guess more like commercial districts for street trees. When it's like a resident who wants a tree, we usually refer them to the tree tenders
Vitalize.
group I mentioned.
Okay.
And yeah, because they're more like trained in how to like help out homeowners and get them a tree.
Do you want,
In answer to an earlier question about the environmental group, the tree tenders, the tree tenders work sort of in partnership with the Shade Tree Commission in that in Naylor's Run Park, we have what we call a tree nursery, which is a fenced-off area where we grow seedlings and a little bit more mature tree specimens that are available through the Tree Commission or the tree tenders to plant in the township. And so we already have this, like a very solid relationship with tree tenders. And so right now, it's very conducive. And I'm very optimistic about the tree canopy in Upper Darby because of Evan and the commissioner that we lost, but who was working with the tree tenders as well, and other folks like that. So, it's we're doing what we can for the township, and it's important.
Well, the battle is honestly letting people know
Yes.
what they
Yeah.
can and cannot do.
Mm-hmm. I mean, is it feasible to do a mailing to all the residents? Like, is it?
it's a lot of paper.
It's a lot of paper. Is it costly? Is it effective? But
We could put it in
people
like
do
a
have-
newsletter too.
Sorry?
Yeah, we could always put it in a newsletter, put it on social media,
There you go.
things
Yeah.
like that.
Kill
There's
more
there's
trees
ways.
to print the newsletters. I get it, yeah.
I know. Yeah, it's a little delicate, right? Like,
But newsletters, township newsletters go
Yeah,
out.
it
They're
could be
gonna go
part
out
of the town,
regardless.
part of the township
Where
newsletter.
are the 25 trees going this spring that you just mentioned?
You have to come to the Shade Tree Commission.
oh,
I
yeah.
planted with Bonnie. No, I planted with Bonnie. I did that park down.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, it's a few places. There's a couple parks. We're putting a lot in the Westchester Pike median, and then we're putting like 2 or 3 kind of like down in like 69th Street area. Yeah, just street
Pots
trees.
or in those big pots or no? No.
No, not in the pots, like in the sidewalk cutouts.
Okay. The pots thing is dead. We're not going to do the trees in the pots anymore. It didn't work.
Is that a thing? I don't.
I'm not sure about the pots, but we have a grant. We've applied for a grant through TD Bank for a tree planting and kind of a whole program on 69th Street to work sort of hand in glove with the update of 69th Street that the township has for like park benches and bicycle lockups and some other like positive things. And our grant application was for enough resources to be able to plant about 25 trees in the ground in 69th Street, to cut out concrete and plant in the ground, because pots are a difficult place to keep a tree alive. And so we're hopeful that we'll get that grant from TD Bank, or but that's the kind of thing that we're involved with, that try to, improve the township.
Again, you all need a grant researcher.
Yeah, we had a person in the township who was helping us with grants, but I think she left the employ of the township, and yeah, everybody does.
You know, that phrase, no money, no mission.
So, Josh, do you need an official vote from us tonight, just the conversation?
Just, your guys' recommendations
Okay.
and thoughts on, because this isn't,
And
part
your
of the zoning
experience,
ordinance. Yeah.
with this kind of
Right.
thing.
Sadly, my experience.
Thank you for your work.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Any feedback, please? We don't have an email as a commission. It's kind of a sore point with us, so if you could funnel information at this point through Josh or through Bill.
All right.
Are y'all on Instagram? Because
I'm not.
everybody of note seems to be on Instagram. No, honestly, I mean, and that is the way people are using, as a source of information.
I got a question. What are the best 3 trees for that tree path, in your opinion?
For the tree path?
Yeah.
What tree path?
What do you call that little thing between
Oh,
my side?
The median?
No, the tree lawn.
The tree lawn.
Yeah,
The tree
in
lawn.
New England, they call it the tree path.
Okay, tree lawn. It depends. Like my side of the street, I have power lines above. So it would have to be something small, like a crab apple or a red bud or something, or
I mean, in the ordinance, we have an appendix. There's like a list of trees in there, I think.
the last
Okay.
2 pages of the ordinance highlight some native trees that are, especially conducive to growing in this part of PA.
Yeah, check out the list. But yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is definitely a work in progress, and we hope to incorporate some of your notes. But thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
In our item number 7, a new business, we have a representative from the Pennsylvania Environmental Council here tonight, Susan Meyerov, to tell us a little bit about the report on what our barriers are to getting better with our water infrastructure.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Susan Meyerov. I'm Watersheds Program Director for the Pennsylvania Environmental Council. I'm actually joined tonight by 2 colleagues you'll also be hearing from, if that's okay, for a presentation tonight. Just quickly, our Pennsylvania Environmental Council is a statewide nonprofit environmental organization. We work in 3 different program areas: air, land, and water. Air is climate and energy. We have trails and recreations, where we're currently working with Upper Darby right now on some trail work. And I'm with our watersheds work, so we work around the state to help inform and educate folks about issues around preserving, protecting our streams and water resources. And in particular, we do a lot of work around stormwater management, education, and outreach. So about a year ago, we approached Josh and Upper Darby through, I believe, through Eastern Delaware County Stormwater Collaborative about some funding that we were able to obtain from the Pennsylvania Coastal Zone Management Program to undertake audits of suburban Philadelphia municipalities to see if there were any policies or programs that prevented or were barriers to green infrastructure or green stormwater infrastructure implementation. So we were very happy when you expressed interest in having us come in and do that evaluation. So what I'm going to be presenting tonight is some of the recommendations after this process, this audit. We're going to tell you a little bit about that. We're also going to just start with kind of why do we do this and why is this really important? And we'll then dive just a little bit into some of those recommendations. I think you all have copies of the recommendations report, and just to see if you have any questions. So I really do appreciate the time and opportunity tonight. And I'd like to just call on my colleague, Diana Maher, who's our program coordinator. I just want to mention, we're all from our Philadelphia office in Peck. We do have offices around the state, but we're all from Philly. Oh, sure, okay, sure. Did you want me to hand these out? Oh, okay, great, I'll do that. Right, okay. I just have a copy of the presentation. I feel bad after the tree discussion, we're giving the paper stuff. I know, that's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Diana Mayer. I'm the program coordinator for Watersheds Department at PEC. And I'm just going to introduce the presentation and then pass it over to my colleagues again. So as development occurs, there is an increase in impervious surface, and that replaces the natural environment. And when there's large enough storms, it can lead to issues such as flooding, sediment and riparian erosion, water pollution, damaged infrastructure, and combined sewer overflow that releases municipal waste into our streams and rivers. Stormwater management is important because green stormwater infrastructure as a type of stormwater management can reduce the impacts of the impervious surface impacts. So as we increase impervious surface, these instances start to increase and it can do more damage to our water quality and our natural environment. So stormwater management helps preserve high quality streams and restores our damaged streams. So a traditional approach to stormwater management is flood control. So this happens through ponds and detention basins. And these are more for larger storms, but green stormwater infrastructure can manage small and large storms. They're more for smaller storms because they can be incorporated into infrastructure and impervious surface areas. So the benefits of green stormwater infrastructure is they can manage small storms, they can further reduce, they can further reduce runoff and protect water quality, and they can provide other community benefits. So these benefits can be, I apologize. These benefits can be increased property values, increased mental health values, and reducing, my bad, reducing erosion. Yes, thank you. So the goal of our stormwater ordinance audits is improving water quality through increased implementation of green stormwater management practices. So local codes may require things like subdivision with no open space, but not allow subdivision with open space. They may require curb and drains on roads, but not require swales without curbs. And they may require detention basins with turf grass, but not detention basins with native plantings. So I'm just going to turn it over back to Susan.
Okay, so just again, we have been for many years trying to encourage the use of these nature-based practices because the water as it comes down is able to infiltrate into vegetated areas before it infiltrates into the ground. So it's a way of slowing the water and also treating it and getting some of the pollution out of it. So we came across a tool that would help us evaluate codes and policies, zoning, subdivision, stormwater ordinances that would kind of help us think about where we could just tweak the codes to make sure that you didn't have policies in place that were maybe preventing the use of these kinds of nature-based practices. This audit tool was actually developed by the University of Wisconsin Extension, and it seemed to us like a really great way to evaluate the codes and ordinances for these small changes. So we use this tool, and okay, there we go. How do you make it go? I'm sorry. How do you make it go the next? Oh, okay, got it. It's not, sorry about that. Okay, so I mentioned we had got some funding to do this around the region. I wanted to give you a quick update. We've conducted these audits in 5 different townships around the area. Abington, Upper Gwinnett, Lower Merion, Upper Darby, and we are also working in Newtown Township, also in Delaware County. And this, again, was funded through a grant from the Pennsylvania Coastal Zone Management Program. So I just wanted to make you aware that we've learned a lot as we've been doing these valuations. We work very closely with the staff of each of the municipalities, and sometimes we are working with the appointed officials, such as yourself, Planning Commission, Environmental Advisory Councils, Shade Tree Commission, who've helped in these evaluations. Okay. I still don't know how to do this. Sorry, I don't know how to use a. With,
I don't know. I'm not
oh,
sure.
because it's on, it's a PDF, not a
Oh, okay.
PowerPoint, which is why
Page
I'm.
down?
I know.
Okay, there you go.
Hey, okay. Sorry about that. So just, I know you're not going to read all this, but I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot. So the audit tool itself is a series of about 80 different questions in 12 different areas, everything from landscaping to parking to stormwater to zoning. And we go through the process of responding to the questions and provide our response based on looking at your codes and ordinances. So this is what one cell from one of these big Excel spreadsheets. So if you can imagine, we had a very huge sort of audit tool. And the first part of this audit is called a report card. So we're supposed to answer the question, and if we see this practice enabled in your code, it can get a couple of different grades. A would be it's in there and it's incentivized. Or C, which is usually the one we were finding from not just Upper Darby, but many of our municipalities, was it's just not really mentioned. So there's nothing in there. If it gets the D, that's kind of like there is something that's preventing, there's a barrier. So you may not allow curb cuts on islands in a parking lot. It's that specific. So we try to identify those, and then we presented the audit tool back to Josh and had him evaluate it. And in some cases, we don't really agree with that, or, okay, we went through all the codes, we couldn't find something, and sometimes we don't see it. But generally, it's a really great back and forth, so we get to understand the issues. And this is also a way for us to work with Josh and the staff to prioritize some of the things that the township is going through. Okay, I'm going to get this right eventually. Scroll down. 2 fingers? Oh, look at that. Okay, that makes it much easier. Okay, there you go. So as a result of this audit of this big sort of report card, we developed a series of recommendations and put them into the report that you have in front of you. And we decided to organize the report based on 5 different categories versus that we had those 12 different areas. It was just too much. So we put them into 5 areas that we thought were just a little bit more concise and easier to understand. So those, let me, okay, there they are. There's the categories. So what I'm going to be going through, and also Paul will be coming up to talk a little bit, are just an example of our recommendations from each of these categories. So you'll hear from us tonight a little bit about these recommendations from each of these categories. And again, in the report, we go into a lot more detail, as you probably noticed, because it includes not just our recommendations, but we have an appendix that includes some sample language, more resources, so that if you have an interest in one of our recommendations, we try to provide, hey, here's some sample language. This is where you might be able to find out more information. We recognize all of these kinds of recommendations would need to be vetted through your solicitor. It's really just a suggestion on ways that you might be able to have these small changes. Okay. So I'm just going to start real quickly about the first category, which we call reference. Essentially, it's, do you have definitions of some of these practices? It's kind of a simple thing to think about, but I think at every single zoning code we looked at in all these different municipalities, not one of them had a definition of green stormwater infrastructure. It just wasn't in there. And one of the ways you signal that you support this kind of practice is to have a definition in your codes. And so we just made some general recommendations where if we didn't see it, we just suggested a few things. So make sure that you have definitions. Make sure that the purpose statement in your zoning includes that you want to encourage these types of practices. And also have some definitions around landscaping and permeable materials. And we're going to go through that. I think I have an example yet. So these are just 3 things that Josh had identified as being important. I don't want to go through them too detailed, but again, we're just suggesting ways that you could add some definitions into the ordinances or cross-reference to perhaps a manual or other guidance that have these definitions. One of the things we have been referencing for many years was something called the PA, Department of Environmental Protection, Stormwater BMP manual. So this is this big manual of all these kinds of practices. That's a great cross-reference in some of these codes. They just released the new updated version of that. So that's just out now for public comment, but that's something that I think we're going to recommend that many of our municipalities cross-reference those types of guidance documents. And one of the other things that I had mentioned is for references, in your purpose statements, you might say that we value nature-based solutions, if that's your priority. So that's basically what reference is. It's just basically adding definitions. Now I'm going to have Paul come up to talk about flexible standards. This is probably the one that we have the most comments on. It's basically allowing changes, again, tweaks in some of the criteria and standards to allow them to permit more nature-based solutions.
Okay. How does this work? Just kind of 2 fingers on it?
2 fingers, I guess.
Okay, all right, got it. Okay, so flexible, the way I looked at this was fairly urbanized township you're in, so you want to figure out where's this green infrastructure going to go, the GSI, it might be a bioswale or a rain garden or a tree trench, so you want to figure out, flexibility for where it might go, where could the landscaping go, so we looked at the code and there was a couple of recommendations we had that apply to things like, well, first one was like parking lots, so you have parking lots and you have requirements, there are some requirements, the SALDO does say that you can manage stormwater in your parking lot, you can have a little island and manage stormwater. However, the zoning code is a little bit more, says you have a parking lot island, but it has to have a curved island, sort of a planter that wouldn't really enable the stormwater feature. So our recommendation here was just to sort of look at your SALDO and your zoning and just be more specific about that you can, in fact, manage stormwater in a parking lot area. So that was like a typical recommendation. You could kind of tweak your ordinance. And then you can go a little bit further because there's some, you could be a little bit more specific about the size, how, we talked about trees, I guess, how, you're gonna have a tree and it might need a certain amount of area to grow successfully, depth and an amount of soil. So you could put some minimum sizing for the landscaping islands that would then make, the tree would survive, you'd have the stormwater management feature. So it's just sort of some tweaks that would enable, basically, you could have more of these green infrastructure in your parking lots in Upper Darby. So that's kind of an example. And you could take that to the next area would be, let's see, your streets. So now we're talking about looking at things like tree trenches or bump outs where you might have a little bump out, vegetated, the stormwater can run into the bump out and infiltrate. And in this case, it appears the GSI, you can extend into the right of way. However, it's just kind of very general. It should be graded for proper stormwater management. So our recommendations here is kind of along the lines what Susan was said, is just be very more specific about in the SALDO 806 and then actually name the practices, like you can put in a tree trench. The tree trench is going a little bit beyond, there's a shade tree you might have, but a tree trench will be something like you see in the pictures there, where you got the tree, but you also have underground infiltration bed. So you basically have a area to capture and store a larger amount of runoff before it then goes into the storm drain, the traditional storm drain. So it's sort of like put that into the code to identify a tree trench or some other, a curb cutout, a bump out, or other features. So basically that's what our recommendation is here, is just sort of more detail on what could be in a streetscape in Upper Darby. So, and then I just put a note in here because the last example sort of of space that we found was more in you have your buffers. A lot of times the buffers are more for aesthetics. You have to, it calls for maybe evergreen trees and a row of them because you're trying to block something visually. And if you could enable the stormwater also to be integrated into some of your buffers, that would be another sort of tweak that we call out the section. And you still want to maintain the visual screening, but also be able to accommodate some stormwater management infrastructure. Green so that's another example. You're being a little bit flexible with your green spaces. And the last example I had here was just more removing, see if we can get to it. There's the green, and then there's a lot of impervious surface. There's a lot of paving out there. And if there's if you're getting to the point where you can remove some of it, remove impervious surface, just to have some standards in there. So there's not really a review process, a standard for how to remove the impervious surface, and then kind of how much soil and vegetation is there to enable infiltration. So little tweak. And we basically, as Sue was saying, we have appendices that goes in a little bit more into details where you'd get these recommendations. So those are sort of the things that I have for flexibility. And Sue?
All right, just a couple more. Yeah, now I got this down. So the last couple of categories that we made some recommendations involved the category of incentives. So are there ways in your codes and policies that you could encourage nature-based practices as like a first choice when you see a development come into the township? So there's a couple of different categories for incentives. I listed them here. It could be some kind of a development incentive where perhaps you give an expedited review process, or another way is kind of bonuses. If you put a rain garden in, then maybe you get some additional floor area ratio. There's different ways that you can kind of involve incentive approaches here. The other things I mentioned are grants for having property owners put these features on their properties. Rebates is another incentive, especially if you have something like a stormwater fee, and you might get a rebate on that fee if you install these practices. And then recognition is always a really good incentive. I think if you have a business or a institution or even a resident who does something that has an exemplary example of this, you could give them a nice recognition about what they're doing. So there's a lot of ways you can do this and incorporate this. Might not be in the code specifically, but there could be some incentives that you could think about in terms of encouraging this kind of stuff. All right, let's see. Okay. Just one example I wanted to share, which was related to shared parking agreements. And I think for this, what we found was there is, you do allow shared parking, but it's allowed only via special exception. And also there's, the applicant has to show to you what their proposal is. And what we were recommending from some of the best practices that we saw was to have sort of a formula so that they wouldn't, it would all be in your code how you can do shared parking, so there isn't this sort of everyone is trying to do it on their own. And then also not have to go through that special exception process, which does add time and expense for a developer. So again, having it as sort of a by right versus having something that they need to go an extra step to do, which then sometimes is a deterrent for these kinds of things. It's just something to think about. Okay. And I think, yeah, and the site plan category is more about, are you including all the things you need to look at when you're reviewing a plan related to nature-based practices? One of the things I do as a volunteer, I'm on our EAC in my township, and I do the plan reviews, and I can tell you it's frustrating when we have a plan for us to take a look at, and it's already in sort of the final development, and I can say why there's no green infrastructure, but it's kind of late in the process. So it's kind of nice to see those kinds of concepts early on. And again, if you're encouraging these, you might see them come to you as right in the beginning in a concept stage. So it's one of those things that on the site plan, it would be good to see, what are you thinking about for stormwater? We know we have ordinances that the developer will have to comply with, and that will get reviewed by your engineering team. But if you could say to them, could you maybe show us some green practices upfront, early, then there's a way that you can perhaps encourage that, so that, you're not seeing it at the end of the development process and, there's not one tree in this stormwater. Can we have it changed? And that can be a real problem at the end of the development process. And one of the things that we've commented on was this, are you consolidating the information properly on the site plan so that you understand the relationship between the stormwater and the landscaping features and the topography and things like that? This is just a consideration. What we want is to make it easier for you to look at all those things at one time. So that's just one of the recommendations we made. Okay. Let's see if I can go up. This is just. Okay. Oh, this is the consolidated plan I just talked about. Landscaping, grading, drainage, stormwater, all on one site plan. Sometimes it's helpful. So that's just kind of might make your job a little early easier. Okay. Okay. The final category was really more about education. It's not going to be in the codes per se. It's just having a general awareness amongst the staff and the public works folks about these types of practices. I think it's we're seeing more and more of the green infrastructure now because the benefits to resiliency are just one of the many things that we want to see. These practices do have different types of maintenance requirements, and I know you were concerned about maintenance, and it's like maintaining a garden. You're not just mowing a lawn, you're doing some other things. So you have to kind of understand those requirements and have some information about them. So those are just kind of general education recommendations that we made. I think specifically included references to things like a downspout disconnection program, and then we have in the appendix some examples of how that might occur. All right, I believe that's the end. Okay.
What is downspout disconnect? What does that mean?
Oh, okay, sure. So if, in many communities, your downspouts are required to be connected to the
Storm sewer.
Yeah. The storm drain, yeah. Yeah, so, that usually then will lead, it will come off your roof through the storm drain right into your stormwater infrastructure, the gray, well, I'll call the gray infrastructure. One of the ways that we can interrupt that and maybe slow the volume down is to divert the downspout into a vegetated area. So it could go into a rain garden, rain barrels, which are really popular right now. So you're kind of intercepting that water and collecting it in a rain barrel, then you can reuse the water on your property. So there are actually specific downspout disconnect programs in different municipalities. I think we have some examples of some of those. It's just, it's really more about what would work here in Upper Darby. I know we do a lot of work in Philly, and in some cases, it's not allowed, you aren't allowed to disconnect, so it becomes, again, another education, and where is it more appropriate? I don't know if you've ever walked down a street where you've got everyone's roof leaders coming right down their driveway, and I can say that in my township, that it's just one big river, because all that water is just dumping right into the street. And if some of those, I always think that if they were just, they were connected or going into even just on their grass or into a garden area, maybe we wouldn't be seeing that, but that's. Sure, yeah.
There's a Stream Smart program in this area. It's Eastern Delaware County Stormwater Collaborative and Pennsylvania Resource Council, and they work with homeowners, but they've been doing, there's probably 60 or 70 of them that they've done the downspout disconnects where they worked with a resident and found where they could disconnect it and have it go across the yard or they have to have some space where the resident is willing to have the water. But it is something they're using here in this area.
And PRC does it?
Yeah.
PRC,
Okay.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I manage the program for them. I mean, I'm like the project manager, and they report to me. I just saw it like today, the other day was like, they had like 60 of them. So.
Yeah, so it's again, one of these, a tweak that can be made on your own property to help with stormwater. Okay, I think that is our conclusion. We look forward to hearing what you think and, of course, answering any questions that you have. And, the process is different with each municipality. Some will take a couple of these different recommendations, or it's really up to you what you prioritize and what you think is important. And then we can provide some additional support if you need us to do some additional research, or we tried to find samples of language from Pennsylvania municipalities as much as we could. But really the next step would be what would you like to do with this information? And we'd be happy to help support.
So we have your recommendation, the report of it, right? Okay. And then ultimately, we're going to review it and some of it would get incorporated into our land development ordinance and zoning ordinance and whatnot.
Exactly, yeah. The plan right now, right, is the three initiatives we set, or the planning commission set at the beginning of the year, right? It was to adopt our own saldo. So the comments in here that reference that saldo, those are things that we're gonna look into and use the references and use the example codes to put in that process. And then for the zoning recommendations, right, we want to do a GSI / solar or zoning amendment. So, we'll pull from that part of the report when we do that, and things of that nature.
What addresses, when they repaved my street, they changed the way the water was directed. The height of the street really screwed up a lot of how the water was directed. It's now pooling in people's driveways. Who instructs how these streets are repaired and paved?
So that's a little outside of this committee. That would be more of a public works question. I know, Mike, if you want to chime in.
So so we paved, the Public Works, we put out a program to repave the roadways. There's also roadways that are paved by utility companies. Typically, when a roadway is repaved, it gets milled and overlaid. So they're matching existing grades. I don't know of your
They did not mill our street.
They didn't mill it, they just overlaid, you're saying?
Right, and it
Do
really,
you know when this was done?
2 summers ago, I think. Or last,
summers ago.
it might have been last summer.
Well, let's talk, let me know the location, because we check, after we pave a road, we check it after it rains, make sure that it's not ponding. So I can definitely.
Oh,
go out there
yeah.
and take a
Oh,
look at it.
then, yeah,
Yeah.
I'll get with you.
Yeah, and it may be something that was done by a utility company. I don't know, but I know every time we pave a road, we have our township inspector, he goes out, he checks it, makes sure that everything flows properly. And that's part of the contractor's requirements. But as far as the stormwater comments here, I'll note that a lot of good recommendations. I like them. The zoning stuff would really, like, a lot of times Josh and I, we meet with developers. They come in first to present their project, and we're often pushing the green infrastructure, but having an incentive. For example, if someone has to, get a variance to get parking, they're fighting us, well, you're gonna make me get a variance to add this green space. If there was some way to have that synergy, that would be a big help, I think. Some of the downspout disconnection, we do require that in the stormwater ordinance, but just for, when they come in for a land development, but not necessarily, if they're not coming in for a land development, no one's gonna make them disconnect or have an incentive for it. So it's all good things, because that promotes infiltration. But I think there's a lot of good recommendations.
Okay, oh, right, you you need your, okay, great.
So just generally, so this funding that's supporting the audit against, with I think you said 5 municipalities in this area. Are we all like sort of in the same place? I was curious in terms of like, after we go through the recommendations and maybe we make some, changes and stuff, will you guys be able to come back and look at, I know you're saying you guys are gonna, assist us in actually facilitating this, but will we be able to, is part of the audit a second run through of these questions to see if the changes we've made, in your view, from positively affect the things we're sort of measuring here?
Well, I think we can.
I'm just curious about like the
Yeah,
process
we can,
overall.
we have some, the grants that well, yes, we can come back in and help. I'll just make it, yes, we can do that. We can absolutely support that. Yeah, I don't want to get into all the grant stuff. Yeah. Yes.
Because I have a question. So do you have any spots in Upper Darby now that you think we should focus on? Like, have you driven around and looked at certain spots and said Pullman Gardens is horrible, or?
Oh, gosh. No, I haven't done that. In terms, I don't think I would be really the person to
Okay,
tell
just
you
curious.
that.
just so you know.
Nailers Park, yeah, that's Nailers Run Park. Yeah, I mean, I've seen, I wouldn't want to offer that at this point. I don't have enough, knowledge that way. Certainly been to a lot of places, but I think everything is unique,
And it's a look at our codes too, not necessarily specific
Yeah, we do.
specific locations, just our code in general. As developers come to us, right, and apply for different things, how can we make it more towards what we'd want to see versus what they're doing now?
I just didn't know if there was like some hot spots that people saw. It was
Yeah, Paul was reminding me that Jamie Anderson, who facilitates the Eastern Delco Stormwater Collaborative, would have a lot more local knowledge, to answer questions like that, and also,
We kind of work directly with them. They're on the ground here.
Yeah, they're doing-
PRC and.
PRC,
DCBA, the RV
Right.
Creek Valley
Association, right? Those are all partners that we work with, but they are really the on-the-ground, they know the neighborhoods, they work a lot with the community, so.
Well, thank you very much for the report. I think we're all in agreement that these are principles we definitely ought to be acting upon, trying to include them as we develop our own saldo. And look forward to trying to incorporate these, working with Josh as we get a saldo together that's our own, and bouncing what we come up with off you, hopefully in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think that was the end of the agenda, right? Okay. Motion to adjourn? Okay, thank you all.